So, this is a particular topic that I think is incredibly important for you guys. So, I really want you to make sure you pay attention, add these terms into your literary terms, and just in general, there's a couple of PDF forms that I want you to keep into your Google Drive that are forever handouts that we're going to keep going back to and talking about a lot. And this is really going to help you, again, as we progress through your pre-AP class and prepping you for AP Language and AP Literature. So we're going to talk about mood and tone, and we're going to talk about connotation and denotation, which is used to create mood and tone. So our terms that you're going to be putting into your grammar terms book and your notebook are diction. Diction just means word choice. And then we have two words, denotation and connotation. I should have reversed these because I feel like they're important. Denotation is dictionary definition of a word, right? So there's nothing added to it. It's very stripped down. It is the just dictionary definition. Connotation, alternatively, is the feeling that particular word invokes. So there's like this underlying meaning, a positive, a negative, or even a neutral feeling associated with the word beyond what's in its dictionary definition. As I said before, denotation and connotation specifically get you to a mood or a tone. So mood is how you feel about the text, right? Something about it, and usually it's the setting, creates a certain feeling for you. So we're going to talk lots of feeling words. And whereas tone is how the author or the speaker feels about the text. So in parentheses I've got speaker because sometimes our author, we don't know who the speaker is, and so we can assume safely that it's the author. But other times our speaker could be a persona created by the author. So it's really important to remember that is whose feeling or attitude that we're going to be looking at. So some examples that we've got here. So denotation, dictionary definition of the word chicken is just a barnyard fowl. But if I called you a chicken, there would be all kinds of connotations associated with it, like you're that person that didn't show up for that fight after school in the playground. You get called chicken, there's a very negative association attached to it. Another example, chick is just a baby chicken, but we often refer to girls, and I don't mean like 7-year-old girls, but usually like teenage girls or even full adult women as a chick. Well, look at that chick. And it depends on what's going on when somebody uses that word. They might be just using the word with nothing negative associated with it, but sometimes there's a negative tone to it. Snake is just a reptile, but when one uses it and calls another person a snake, it hails back to that biblical, Adam and Eve, the snake coming and enticing Eve. And we've got that evil negativity, that sneakiness associated with the snake as a result of that biblical meaning of snake. Home is just simply a house that's built where that anybody could live in. And home, connotation where you live, more to it than that. It's the feelings that are evoked by where you live. Some of you guys, home might be a very positive, warm place where you can go to be yourself and be calm. For others, a home might be a very negative connotation associated with it. Maybe there's a lot of fighting going on or things that don't make you very happy. So think about some other, just a thinking exercise for yourself. Think about a couple more for yourself where there's just a dictionary definition, but it's a word that's maybe a little bit loaded when used, and there's more information underneath the surface that's not stated beyond just the word or even the little bit of the phrase. Some examples that we've got here, positive, and think about this in shades of meaning, right? If I called somebody thin, it would be a compliment. But if I called somebody skinny, suddenly that's a different thing. That's not just thin, that's, something else is going on. We're worried. It doesn't look pretty, that kind of thing. If you're just somebody who's very conversational versus being called talkative, the word talkative tends to have much more negative underlying tones to it. And the case can be made for each of these, young versus being called childish. To debate versus to argue, to be confident versus to be arrogant. So suddenly, even though these dictionary definitions, right, these are all synonyms that might show up in a thesaurus, those synonyms tend to take on some different real meaning underneath the surface of each of them. So you might find the word arrogant and confident in the synonym section of the thesaurus, but if you didn't want to be mean in your description, you might not want to choose that particular synonym. Again, a thinking exercise. You've got lots of words here. Think about, do they create a negative or a positive feeling in you when you hear the word? And how could you switch and change that word to becoming more negative or positive, whichever the case may be? So let's talk about mood. Again, this is about how you feel about the text. It's going to be an emotion word, just like with tones. They're all emotion words. And it's going to usually be created through the use of description of the setting and the connotation of the setting choices. So examples of different types of moods that you could potentially have might be a frightened mood, a happy or a gloomy or a suspenseful or a frustrated mood. When it comes to photographs or images that we can see, the mood becomes a little bit more obvious. So let's look at that. In this case, we've got a picture that's really just a lot of blue, which is the sky, and a green hill and some green trees. Not much going on, but when we see that, it evokes a particular mood in us. And the mood that I'm going to use the word is peaceful. I have evidence of that peaceful mood, though. It's a beautiful day. All right, there's barely a wisp of a cloud in the sky. You've got bright green grass. Everything looks very healthy. It just looks very calm. So there's another word choice I could have used, peaceful or calm. If I said that the mood was, gloomy, and you saw this picture, we would have some disagreement for sure. There's no evidence of the fact that this is gloomy. None of the typical things that would create a gloomy feeling are in this picture. So tone and mood need to have some kind of evidence to support them. And we're not going to have one single piece of evidence. It's really important that you have multiple pieces of evidence to support your assertions, especially if you're going to assert that this is a very gloomy day. Now you definitely need to have a lot more evidence to support it. And you might be able to, but I seriously doubt it in this particular instance. So here's some more images. Again, we've got a mood for each of these. And we could have variations of the word. Right here, this, tree with this purple, and orange and yellow sunset into the ocean might evoke a peaceful or a calm or a tranquil mood. Lots of different word choices, but we could all agree that they're pretty much going to be the same, and there's no disagreement on that. But again, we would have no evidence to claim that this was a gloomy mood being created by this particular image, right? Down below here, we could say that it's gloomy, but frightening might be more, or scary might be the more accurate term. Peaceful, for sure not. We wouldn't have any evidence to support peaceful. There's nothing about that that's peaceful. And so when you look through each of those, think about what would you say the mood is for each picture, and what is your evidence to support that statement. This one, I think, probably is up for the most interpretation, this upper right picture here. These clouds coming in and these different colors happening, but it looks like there's some kind of a field of something being grown, maybe wheat or barley or something. And then we've got multiple suns, so it's otherworldly for sure. You could say that it's not necessarily gloomy, but chaotic could be a word that you could use. Certainly I wouldn't say it's a restful image, right? The way that this image of the Christmas tree in the little town are restful or peaceful or tranquil or happy, joyous. Lots of different word choices that you can use, but there are wrong word choices for sure. So let's talk about tone. Again, we're going to use those emotion type words, but it's about, again, the author or the speaker, if the author is speaking in the voice of a narrator. It's how they feel about the text, or specifically the subject matter, what's being spoken about. They can take on a lot of different tones. We're going to talk about lots more words. It could be a very formal tone. It could be playful or happy or gloomy, or negative in general. And so when we think about that, again, you can look at imagery. And so an abstract image like this is a really good piece to look at because we don't have specific setting happening. But we've got a lot of red. We've got what looks like broken lines in glass. And so red, yes, it is typically associated with anger and blood. And really there's a lot of negatives associated with red. But if that was the only thing that you were basing your assertion of it being an angry tone, is the fact that it was a red image, that wouldn't be quite enough. So you really need to have more of these explosive cracks need to be added into your evidence for why this tone would be angry. We're going to talk about this particular handout because this is very, very helpful in determining tone, and frankly lots of words in here that you would use also for the mood. And we're going to talk about this acronym DIDDLES here in a little bit that helps you get to a better understanding of your tone words. All right, so again, thinking exercise. What mood and tone are you feeling from each passage, and what is jumping out at you as evidence for that? So example, wait. I said, tugging Benjamin back. I knew the gardener hadn't given up his last breath just to ask if the smell of truth had worked. He was trying to tell us something about the herbs. So one of the phrases that jumps out at me is the last breath. Literary dictionary definition of that would be literally like the last breath you took. And I could take more breaths, right? But we're going to talk about the last one I took. It sounded a little wheezy or something like that. But we know that that phrase, last breath, has some deeper connotations. It's the actual last breath because you're dead. So now this is taken on some really serious meaning. Somebody has died as a result of wanting to reveal some information, and was willing to do that in order to give up that information. So it becomes now very important. So thinking about different types of moods and tone words that you would use to describe that. This next one is a really good example of why syntax is so important. We've been talking about syntax or your sentence structures and the choice to have very short versus very long structures. So let's read this. I am running. That's the first thing I remember. Running. I carry something, my arm curled around it, hugging it to my chest. Bread, of course. Someone is chasing me. Stop, thief! I run. People, shoulders, shoes. Stop, thief! So there's a lot of syntax choices here. We have a really super long sentence starting with I carry something. And then we have lots of short sentences to the point of just singular words like shoulders. Bread is an interesting choice, right? Because that was a detail that we needed to know, right? If it had been like our last story, if it had been blue suede shoes as opposed to bread, there would have been some different thought processes about the mood or the tone of this particular passage. But bread in and of itself tends to have some connotations of hunger when you're without it. For some reason, bread is that most basic thing that people think of when they are hungry and they're, literally begging for a crust of bread. And so now we wonder, is this really a thief or someone who's just very, very hungry? So interesting to look at that kind of stuff. So we're also going to look at these handouts that are PDFs that I would like you to download. And you have a tone word bank. And again, as I said before, a lot of these words can be used for mood, but let's talk about the acronym used to understand tone, which is DIDDLES, D-I-D-L-S. And it just, again, is helping you to think about certain things that jump out at you that help you understand the tone, because sometimes you really do need to understand the tone. So the example here, or statement here, to misread tone is to misinterpret meaning. If one misses irony or sarcasm, one may misread the meaning of an entire passage. Irony and sarcasm is probably the most important tone that you need to catch, because if somebody is being very ironic in their tone, or sarcastic in their statements, especially if it's a prolonged, the entire piece is very sarcastic, much like those publications, The Onion, the newspaper The Onion, where they just make up a story, and the whole thing is very sarcastic and biting satire. And if you thought it was real, a real story that you read in The Onion, like it was a real news outlet that had reported something, you would have very much misinterpreted what was occurring with that. So really important to look at that, and diddles helps us to remember the things that we're going to look at to help us think about tone. We've got diction, right, as we've been talking about the connotation of a word choice. Imagery, so some kind of appeals to the senses come up, and again, those involve connotation as well. Details, like specific facts that are included or omitted. So if something's not in there that you're looking for, like who threw that ball through the window, that's a detail that has been omitted. The inclusion of the detail of bread in the previous sentence, a very important detail for us to think on. Language, as we said before, like specific word choices. Was it very formal, very informal, that kind of thing. And then last was syntax, as we discussed, some very specific sentence structures and order. So the previous sentence with the theft of the bread, a very long sentence, but quite a few very short sentences, giving you a feeling of urgency and lack of time, right? A hurriedness to it. Because we don't have time to write about the shoulders that are in the way stopping you from running. We want you to just get that sense of urgency of getting away, but just having a sentence that only says the word shoulders, shoes, people. And that's what the author was trying to do with that previous one. This handout's really cool because sometimes we can't really think on our own of a really cool word like vibrant. But when we see the word and we see our word choices, we know we're dealing with a positive tone. We're just not quite sure what's the best word for that tone. And saying that a tone is, and so there's all kinds of positives. There's a relaxed tone versus an energetic tone. Those are two very opposite words. Energetic versus relaxed, both of them in the positive realm. So you have to be really careful. Like, this is meant to narrow down your thought process about what do you mean by positive. Positive how? And you can be wrong as well. So if you chose relaxed in a scene in which somebody is running away, that would be incorrect. Energetic would not be the tone I would use for the person running away with the bread. It certainly was energetic, but energetic has kind of a positive connotation to it, so you'd want to look more for some other words, like the bread, maybe desperate stood out to you as a word choice. But the cool thing about this handout is you can narrow it down to a word that we get, like positive, negative, fearful, humorous or ironic, and then there's just a list of miscellaneous terms. And of course, there's certainly more terms out there, but having a list in front of you really does give you some more to talk about in your text, in your discussion posts, in your journal entries, things to notice. The next handout that is involved in this particular thing is something called TPCast. I'm going to use TPCast a lot. Again, another acronym. Here we are again. With poetry analysis is the one we use this one for. You may have encountered soapstone previously to help you think about language as well. This one's specifically geared toward poetry, and the interesting thing about it is the first thing they ask you to think about is title, and the last thing besides theme, second to last thing is title again. So twice title shows up, and it's because students often skip past the title in a poem. It just seems so unimportant. And oftentimes, it can be. With William Shakespeare, it was just sonnet number 25, the end. There's no particular meaning in that. But if a poet was writing a poem and it was titled Bread, and the poem was shoulders, shoes, running, now, and you're like, why is this person running? We can go back to the title and try to figure that out. And it becomes a little bit more obvious. So, wanting to call your attention as you're reading poetry, stop for a second, think about what is the title telling you, and you can make an incorrect guess. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the slowing down and thinking about the prediction of what's going to occur. And then the next one, the P, is about paraphrasing. So, oftentimes poems can be really confusing. It feels like they're being spoken in riddles. And so if we can just simply summarize in our own words, literally, what is this person saying, it helps us not to miss some important things that are occurring. And so slowing down and just translating it into your own words on its most literal level is really important. Connotation, as we've been talking about quite a bit, in the TP cast form, connotation fills in much of what Diddles is filling in here. So we're looking at meaning beyond literal. That can be a word choice, some loaded diction, that kind of thing, or figurative language, imagery, sound elements, anything where there's a word showing up that you think has something more going on, or it could be a phrase. The next one is attitude or tone, as we've been talking about tone. And this acronym needed the A in there to make it work, so they put in the word A for attitude. But it is our speaker's tone and attitude. Again. Make sure that our speaker is not a persona created by the author, right? It's about the speaker, and that speaker could be the author. But if that speaker is a little girl, that needs to be real clear so that you understand that speaker's attitude toward the subject matter, maybe the stealing of the bread. Shifts are important to notice when you've seen, because tone doesn't typically have one tone in a poem. You're going to have multiple tones. They're going to shift around, and they may all stay positive. They may go from peacefulness to awe. Both of those are positive words, right? But you can tell that something has occurred. We've gone from just being very peaceful and calm and checking everything out to now we're in awe, right? That's often the word that we use when we're like in a godlike type situation where we're brought to our knees in awe. And so you'll see a shift, and again, it's very often at the spot in which the new stanza has occurred, but oftentimes multiple stanzas could be involved in one particular tone. So that peacefulness, we could have two stanzas on peacefulness, and we could see a keyword or a shift, right? Like the word but or although. Some kind of a word usually jumps out at you that indicates that the tone is shifting, even if it's just a tad, going from peacefulness to awe. That could be an important thing to notice. Again, a reminder of the title. And then the last one is thinking about our theme. Again, that's the one where I keep saying universal truth, right? The common human condition. And you're going to be reading a poem by Langston Hughes, and you're going to need to think about theme and what it is saying in that particular poem. So again, common human condition, the universal truth, otherwise known as the theme. It's like the big, what do you think the poem is saying on the subject? And so often going past just a phrase such as the theme is peacefulness, right? It's what is the comment that the poet is making on that theme of peacefulness. It might be that peacefulness is necessary in everybody's life, or it might be some of us just don't get to ever be peaceful in our life. So it's really like a little bit more of a thematic statement of our poet. Go a step further than just a word or a phrase and tell us what you think the poet is saying about that theme. And that's all we're going to cover for today.